Now it's time for the last word, where Ali Velshi is in for Lawrence tonight. Good evening, Ali.
Rachel, thanks again for an amazing show. Have a great evening. I'm Ali Velshi, in for Lawrence O'Donnell. Tonight, the President of the United States is making headlines in two new wide-ranging interviews, offering new claims about his former personal attorney, who is cooperating with federal prosecutors, and giving his take on the midterms, which are now just 21 days away. But the most startling statement in an interview with the Associated Press was the president's new defense of Saudi Arabia's government, as more evidence emerges on the alleged killing of a Washington Post journalist. For days, the president has been parroting the kingdom's denials and floating theories that rogue killers murdered Jamal Khashoggi inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Tonight, President Trump going even further, telling the Associated Press this about the now widespread condemnation of the Saudis. Quote, "I think we have to find out what happened first. Here we go again with, you're guilty until proven innocent." I don't like that. We just went through that with Justice Kavanaugh, and he was innocent all the way as far as I'm concerned. So the President of the United States is now telling the world that he views an alleged murder and potential dismemberment of a U.S. resident and Washington Post journalist the way he views allegations against Brett Kavanaugh, allegations that he repeatedly questioned and tried to undermine. That statement capped off a day when the president seemed to repeat the Saudi government's versions of events. He tweeted this afternoon, "Just spoke with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who totally denied any knowledge of what took place in their Turkish consulate. He was with Secretary of State Mike Pompeo during the call and told me he's already started and will rapidly expand a full and complete investigation into the matter. Answers will be forthcoming shortly." Well, we're still waiting for those answers. And in a taped interview with Fox Business tonight, the president said this.
It depends whether or not the king or the crown prince knew about it, in my opinion. Number one, what happened, but whether or not they knew about it. If they knew about it, that would be bad. Don't forget, Saudi Arabia is our partner. They're our ally against Iran and against missiles and against what they're doing, trying to take over the Middle East. I can only say, I've been here for almost 2 years, they've been a great ally to me. To me. They're investing tremendous amounts of money. They're fighting terror.
And tonight, new evidence is calling into question the Saudi denials that President Trump seems ready to believe. Turkey has released passport photos of 7 men who they say were part of a Saudi team involved in killing Jamal Khashoggi. The New York Times reported tonight one of the suspects identified by Turkey was a frequent companion of the Crown Prince. He was seen disembarking from airplanes with him in Paris and Madrid and photographed standing guard during visits this year to Houston, Boston, and the United Nations. That's not the only New York Times reporting that could be a direct link between Khashoggi's killing and the Saudi Crown Prince that Donald Trump is defending. The New York Times adds 3 others are linked to the Saudi Crown Prince's security detail. And there's this. A 5th is a forensic doctor who holds senior positions in the Saudi Interior Ministry and medical establishment of such stature that he could only be directed by a high-ranking Saudi authority. Turkey's president also gave new details about what forensic investigators are finding inside the consulate. He said they're looking into, quote, toxic materials inside the consulate and the possibility of those materials being removed by painting them over. Remember, a cleaning crew went into the consulate before Turkish authorities could go in to investigate. Now, as the questions mount, President Trump's Secretary of State was in Saudi Arabia today, though questions remain as to whether he was there in an effort to get answers on Jamal Khashoggi or to help the Saudis craft a palatable response to growing global condemnation. Mike Pompeo met with the Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, in what appeared to be less of a reading of the Riot Act than something decidedly more cozy. At a photo op with the Crown Prince that many thought might take on a serious tone, both men were all smiles. They even joked about jet lag. And after their closed-door meeting, Secretary Pompeo released a statement that again reiterated Saudi Arabia's denials and said, without offering any detail, that Saudi leaders have a, quote, serious commitment to determine all the facts and ensure accountability, including accountability for Saudi Arabia's senior leaders or senior officials. FYI, that doesn't actually ever happen. There's no accountability for Saudi Arabia's senior leaders or officials. That's just a fact of the way Saudi Arabia runs. Joining us now is Jennifer Rubin, an opinion writer at The Washington Post and an MSNBC contributor. Also joining us is Richard Stengel, former Undersecretary of State in the Obama administration. He's now an MSNBC political analyst. And Josh Lederman, national political reporter for NBC News, who's been getting us so much of this information. So let's start with you, Josh. What new news do we have out of Saudi Arabia tonight? We do know that the Turks have released these passports of 7 men.
That's right, Ali. The Turkish officials have released to NBC News scans of the bio page of 7 of the Saudi citizens that they say were part of this hit team allegedly sent by the Saudis to Istanbul to perform some type of an operation involving Mr. Khashoggi that led to his death. So these are the scans of that part of your passport where it has your photo and it has your name, all your identifying information like your date of birth, and it matches up with names that were included in a list of alleged Saudi hit team members that was published last week in a Turkish pro-government newspaper. So really the reason that we're seeing the Turks rush to provide as much evidence as possible publicly, Ali, is that they want to make the case as strong as possible in the public that something really screwed up happened here, something that the Saudis need to answer for before the Saudis come out with what we know is going to be a new explanation in which they're going to accept some type of culpability. They see the comments coming from people like President Trump seeming to accept this notion that, well, maybe something went wrong, but Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman was not involved, Saudi leadership wasn't culpable, and the Turks trying to provide as much evidence now so that the case that there's nothing to see here becomes harder and harder for the Saudis to make.
Yeah, Richard, this is sounding like a case where there's nothing to see here, or at least that's what the Saudis would like people to think, that a crew of expert hit people somehow made it into the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, which is one of the most spied upon, surveilled cities in the world, without the knowledge of Mohammed bin Salman. You have met Mohammed bin Salman. He's the crown prince of Saudi Arabia. He's the putative leader there. It would be inconceivable that a high-level hit of a critic of Saudi Arabia would take place without the knowledge of the leadership of Saudi Arabia.
Yes, although I wish the Turks would release the information that they have, and I hope that they're giving it to U.S. intelligence services. In the case of Mohammed bin Salman, who I met in Riyadh in 2016, the Saudis have put all their eggs in his basket. I mean, he's consolidated power. He's basically the future of Saudi Arabia. He has been a reformer, and actually, when I met with him, he talked about letting women drive and opening movie theaters, but he's also done some really awful things. In fact, we're talking about the murder of one man here, but even tonight, the AP reported there are 10 million people potentially suffering from famine in Yemen, a campaign that he has led. So the fact that it's taken just this thing to marshal evidence against Mohammed bin Salman is a bit of a shame. But
some of the criticisms you made are very similar to the criticisms Jamal Khashoggi made. He wasn't the harshest critic of Saudi Arabia. Yes. He had positive things to say about some of the reforms that Mohammed bin Salman was involved in.
In fact, I went back and read some of his columns, and I mean, by American standards, it was very mild. I mean, he would actually say, on the one hand, you know, MBS is doing a lot of good stuff. On the other hand, I wish he would be more of a true progressive. So, you know, part of the problem of autocrats is that they're very thin-skinned. And in his case, you have the case of absolute power corrupting absolutely.
One can wonder why Donald Trump is sympathetic to him, Jennifer Rubin. It's very strange. We have all sorts of people, Republicans, Democrats, being critical of the fact that the White House seems to be floating theories that the Saudis would like to put out there to see how they'll go over and have the least amount of consequence for the Saudis. Why is the President of the United States doing the bidding of the Saudis in Washington to try to clean up their reputation around what has happened to Jamal Khashoggi?
That is one of the mysteries that people are trying to figure out. It may simply be that, like other potentates, other autocrats around the world, they've done a magnificent job of buttering this guy up, playing to his ego, and so he feels like these are his friends. In fact, he said in that interview clip you just played that they've been really good to him. So perhaps it's as benign, although foolish as that. Another explanation could clearly be that he has financial ties there. And this is the problem with a president who has retained his business holdings, who still owns hotels in which the Saudis drop $250,000 at at a time in his hotels. He's bragged in the past about his relationship with the Saudis. We know his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is very tight with the Saudis. So there may be a financial reason. We don't know because, of course, the Republicans won't exercise any oversight in Congress. It may also be that he is confused by his own poorly crafted foreign policy, which has really talking about all the eggs in the basket, has put so many eggs in the basket of the Saudis and gotten so little for it. We have so invested without really any return on our indulgence of the Saudis that now we are deathly afraid that if MBS goes under or if our relations are strained, that we won't have any allies in our fight against Iran, because, of course, we've offended our European allies, so we don't have them anymore. So I think it's some combination of all of those or perhaps some other figure. But what he is saying is now beyond preposterous. The notion, as your other guest said, that these people could get on a plane, that a highly respected forensic doctor could accompany them, that they would go into the Saudi consulate, that figures who were in his inner circle.
With a bone saw. I mean, you can't walk into most consulates with a sharp pen. And somehow somebody goes in with a bone saw.
And they would then be able to return back to Saudi Arabia with assurance that we're not in any kind of legal trouble, legal peril. Yeah. It just defies credulity. And to see Mike Pompeo there with that grin on his face, pumping the arm of the Crown Prince, I must say, is somewhat stomach-turning.
Richard Stengel, both in your role as a former Undersecretary of State and a former managing editor of Time magazine, you understand the difficulty that America and most Western countries get themselves into when they do business with countries that do not conform to what we look at as human rights or press freedoms. I want to play what Donald Trump said on Fox Business tonight, reiterating why he wouldn't punish Saudi Arabia, probably even if he found out they were culpable. Let's hear this.
So we want to be smart. I don't want to give up a $110 billion order or whatever it is. It's the largest order ever given by an outside country, okay? And I don't want to give that up. You're talking about jobs. What I'm doing, we've created an incredible economy. I want Boeing, and I want Lockheed, and I want Raytheon to take those orders and to hire lots of people to make that incredible equipment.
Well,
you understand?
Yeah, no, I get it, but it's complicated stuff, and you're looking at jobs here at home and a lot of money for American companies versus what certainly seems as pretty atrocious. Now we don't know everything, but
we don't know.
I mean these are the decisions that you face as president.
Let's hope we hear the proper answers.
Okay, a lot of things in there. First of all, this $110 billion order, he did say whatever it is, because the Saudis are known to not necessarily order everything that they put on the Memorandum of Understanding. But we do believe the Saudis to be the biggest buyers now of U.S. military equipment. And the president now, for the second time this week, invoking Boeing, Lockheed, and Raytheon, saying they would buy this from the Chinese or the Russians if they didn't buy it from us. That's also not entirely true. The Saudis have long bought equipment from the United States. You can't just switch out parts on things. But that argument, ahead of finding out what's going on, sending the message that I don't really care what we find out about what the Saudis do. We do business with them.
Yes, I mean, we've never had a purely transactional foreign policy the way Donald Trump does. I mean, I was in Saudi Arabia with Secretary Kerry. Yes, we did sell munitions to them, but we also talked to them about human rights and women's rights and not repressing the freedom of their own people with the weapons that we were selling them. Donald Trump is like the Chinese in that respect. He says, we're going to leave well enough alone. Right. And by the way, as you know, the Saudis always build up what they say that they're buying. They're not really buying 110. And by the way, they don't want Russian missiles and they don't want Chinese missiles. They want American missiles. And to also show that Trump is such a poor negotiator, he gave that away even before anything else. He could have said, look, let's look at this and see what happens. Instead, he said, it's off the table.
Yeah. Josh, let's talk about the business relationship between the United States and Saudi Arabia. There's a massive investment conference that was scheduled for a few days from now. Dozens of major business leaders have pulled out. Some, like Richard Branson or William Morris Endeavor, have said that they're actually putting major hundreds of millions of dollar deals on hold with the Saudis. As of tonight, we are learning, we're just waiting to confirm that maybe the head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, is not attending. She's been under a lot of pressure. But as of now, we think that Steve Mnuchin is still going. All of this underscores the degree to which the world gets rich off of Saudi Arabia and Saudi Arabia gets rich off the world. And that comes in the way of condemning a possible human rights violation.
it also illustrates why we are seeing the Saudis have a reversal on this. You know, we've been talking to Saudi officials and Saudi sources who say the kingdom is used to human rights criticisms. They're used to being seen as somewhat of an outcast in the global stage. They're not really that concerned with their reputation when it comes to a lot of those peripheral issues. But really pulling out of this huge business conference, the economic ties, that is hitting Saudi Arabia where it hurts. And particularly for Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, his entire leadership is predicated on this Vision 2030, this new economic plan for Saudi Arabia to try to diversify its economy beyond fossil fuels, really become a modern country that trades and has foreign investment. And when you see foreign businesses pulling out of Saudi Arabia at this alarming of a rate and signaling that they don't feel like they can continue to do business with a government that operates this way, that is really sending up flares for the Saudi government. And our sources tell us that's the reason that the Saudis are now saying, okay, we're going to change our tune. We are going to have to admit some culpability here, that this journalist did not enter the consulate and then shortly after leave, but that something went wrong here. That's why they're doing this massive cleanup operation. It's those economic ties that they're very concerned about.
Remarkable story. Josh Lederman, thanks for your continued reporting on this. Rick Stengel and Jennifer Rubin as well. Coming up, first, they cut $1 trillion in taxes. Now Republicans say the government doesn't have enough money for programs for the middle class, the elderly, and the poor. And in the president's wild interview tonight, he said if Republicans lose in November, it's not his fault.
Don't forget, Saudi Arabia is our partner. They're our ally against Iran and against missiles and against what they're doing, trying to take over the Middle East. And by the way, since I'm here, not succeeding. They're heading down the tubes if you look at what's going on. So Saudi Arabia, and they have, I can only say, I've been here for almost 2 years, they've been a great ally to me.
Yeah.
Donald Trump had a lot to say about Saudi Arabia today, including this to the Associated Press. Quote, I think we have to find out what happened first. Here we go again. You know, you're guilty until proven innocent. I don't like that. We just went through that with Justice Kavanaugh, and he was innocent all the way, as far as I'm concerned. Joining us now is Democrat Congressman Eric Swalwell, a member of the House Intelligence and Judiciary Committees. Congressman, good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
You too, Ali. Thanks for having me back.
Look, I've spoken to a number of members of Congress and senators this week where they have invoked the Global Magnitsky Act to say there's been an allegation of a human rights violation in Saudi Arabia, and the president's going to have to take some action. He is going around and talking to everyone he can talk to say how great the Saudis are to us, notwithstanding the fact that he said he has no business ties to them himself, which isn't entirely true. What does Congress need to press the president on with respect to Saudi Arabia?
Well, Ali, Saudi Arabia may be a kingdom, but we are not. We certainly are not helpless in the Congress to allow the president to align our country with Saudi Arabia with these serious questions about their conduct in this journalist. So in addition to Magnitsky, we can also, press the president to have the FBI formally work with our partners in the region to understand truly what happened. I don't think we're getting anywhere near the truth on this. Also, if we could put a demand in place that the Saudis produce this journalist's body. The family certainly deserves to have his remains immediately, or sanctions would be put in place. And also, a new Congress, I think, and a Democratic majority could understand the full breadth of the president's financial entanglements with the Saudis. He has had decades where they've invested in his businesses, bailed him out of bankruptcy, and he's boasted about it in the past. And we should know if that has been a factor in his decision making.
I mean, that's kind of fascinating that he tweeted out this morning, or it's all blending together with me, that he has no business interest with Saudi Arabia. He has decades of business interests with Saudi Arabia. In 1991, he was bailed out by selling a yacht. In 1995, the Saudi government, this wasn't just a prince associated with the Saudi government purchased an entire floor of Trump Global Tower across from the United Nations for $4.5 million. In 2001, he was bailed out by a prince who was close to, related to the Saudi royal house for $325 million. And then in the last couple of years, we know that sales at his hotels have increased because of Saudis who have been staying at them in order to lobby the government in their interest. These are the kinds of things that you would want Congress to investigate.
And I've written legislation, Ali, that would tighten up the emoluments clause in the Constitution. Now, the courts are allowing a lawsuit that Senator Blumenthal has brought forward, and I and many others are plaintiffs to go forward. But I have legislation that would prevent the president and the vice president or anyone in their family from benefiting financially at all during their tenure in the White House from any foreign national investment. So there's a lot that we can do. Also, Ali, let me just say, I thought over the last 48 hours that maybe the president was parroting the Saudis.
Right.
But now that I start to listen to the president's defense, I wonder if they are parroting him, because they are sounding a lot like what he said about the Trump Tower meeting. He didn't know that the meeting took place.
Right.
And so it sounds like this is just kind of his strategy of deny, 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 and he's projecting that onto the Saudis.
I want to show you just our audience a couple other things that I just mentioned about Trump hotels. There's been a $275,000 increase in revenue at Trump's D.C. hotel, thanks to the Saudis. In New York, a 13% increase in rental revenue, and in Chicago, a 169% increase in bookings, all thanks to the Saudis. In 2015, President Trump bragged about receiving Saudi money for his apartments. Let's listen to that.
Saudi Arabia, and I get along great with all of them. They buy apartments from me. They spend $40 million, $50 million. Am I supposed to dislike them? I like them very much.
Congressman, you and I have talked about the emoluments clause for different reasons as it relates to the Russia interference investigation. This is sort of what the emoluments clause was about. Don't take things of value from foreign countries so that you're not compromised when you actually have to take a position about something those foreign countries have done that are not in your interests.
Our founders envisioned this problem long before it has presented itself here. You know, we had broken away from the British. The French had helped us. They wanted to make sure that we were not loyal to other countries because they were investing in us. And also, Ali, you know, the president went over to Saudi Arabia. It was his first foreign visit. You know, and then this bizarre blockade happened right after he left, where the Saudis and UAE, the Emiratis, you know, blocked Qatar from Qataris from going into Saudi Arabia, and the president bizarrely supported this, despite our largest base being over in the Middle East in Qatar. And so there are a lot of strange connections between the president and the Saudi government that I think a new Congress could understand and untangle.
And a lot of strange things relating to financing on buildings with the president and the president's family, where he was or wasn't getting it from other governments, stuff that you're going to look into. One of the things that I know you really want to look into, particularly if the Democrats take the House in November, is the president's views on the Mueller investigation. This is what he said to Fox last night.
Our Justice Department and FBI played right into their hands with this stupid investigation, or whatever you call it. People say I'm not under investigation. You know, I'm not a target of this investigation, which nobody ever likes to say. But it played right into their hands. Because if they want to sow, they use the word sow chaos, sow chaos. They got it for nothing. They didn't do it. They got it for nothing. We did it to ourselves. The House, Devin Nunes, and they came out with a ruling there was no collusion.
What happens if the Democrats win in November with respect to that discussion?
We protect the Mueller investigation. We fill in the gaps where the Republicans buried the evidence on the House Intelligence Committee. And, you know, we don't just do things to dance in the end zone and do things. You know, we do things to be productive and tell the American people the awareness they need so that an adversary like Russia or any other country can't do this again. And hopefully, unlike what happened in the last 2 years, we do this with bipartisan buy-in, because my Republican colleagues will see so many of their friends have lost their seats for not being willing to stand up to the president.
Congressman, good to see you as always. Thanks for joining me. Congressman Eric Swalwell. All right, coming up, Republicans say the government needs to cut benefits to the middle class, the elderly, and the poor after cutting taxes for the wealthy. And later, President Trump said the midterm elections are a referendum on him, unless, of course, Republicans lose, and then it's not his fault. The U.S. budget deficit is soaring under President Trump. According to the Treasury Department, the federal budget deficit increased by $113 billion in fiscal year 2018, Trump's first full year as president, first fiscal year as president. That's a 17% increase from 2017, and it's the highest the deficit has been in 6 years. The deficit now stands at $779 billion, and the deficit, of course, is the difference between what the government takes in and what it spends. Today, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell tried tried to claim that this steep increase is due to the social safety net.
It's very disturbing, and it's driven by the three big entitlement programs that are very popular: Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid.
But the data points elsewhere. One of the biggest contributing factors to this deficit spike, the GOP tax cuts. According to Treasury data, tax revenues from corporate returns dropped 31% in the fiscal year 2018 compared to the same period last year, which would be strange because companies are making more money than they have made before. Congress knocked off more than $1 trillion worth of forecasted tax revenue and boosted government spending at the same time. It stands in stark contrast to the promises from Trump officials and from congressional Republicans before the tax cuts passed.
Not only will this tax plan pay for itself, but it will pay down debt.
I'm confident this is not only revenue neutral to the government, but actually is very likely to be a revenue producer.
We're right there in the sweet spot with economic growth that gives us more revenue. We're where we need to be.
The problem may get worse. As Bloomberg notes, the Congressional Budget Office forecasts that government spending will outweigh revenue by $973 billion in the fiscal year 2019 and more than $1 trillion the following year. That would be the first time the deficit exceeds $1 trillion since 2012, when the economy was still recovering from the Great Recession. Joining us now are Austan Goolsbee, former chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for President Obama. He's currently a professor of economics at the University of Chicago. Bruce Bartlett also joins me, an economist and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Treasury under President George H.W. Bush, and he's the author of the book, The Truth Matters. Bruce, you and I sat here at this table that I'm at and discussed the fact that these Republican tax cuts are not going to result in the growth that the president kept claiming they would to make up for this deficit. Any thinking person with some economics background could have looked at these tax cuts and said, you're going to get yourself into a bigger deficit. We are where we expected to be. It shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody.
Well, that's exactly right. And I think it's important to understand that every single Republican who commented on this issue a year ago and said revenues would rise or that they would not fall, I'm talking about Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, Steve Mnuchin, they were all lying. They're liars. They knew that they were lying when they said those things. And they wanted revenues to fall because they wanted the deficit to rise. Because
why is that? Why would a Republican want the deficit to rise?
Because what they really want to do is cut entitlement programs. They want to cut those programs that Mitch McConnell talked about, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. And they understand they're very politically popular. They can only be cut when there is a deficit so large that people are frightened and they feel we have no choice. And that has been their goal for 40 years.
Austan Goolsbee, Greenberg research poll indicates a 12-point gap in support for GOP tax cuts. 52% strongly or somewhat oppose the tax cuts, while 40% strongly or somewhat support it. And in a Gallup poll from last week, it shows that 2/3 of people polled have not seen an increase in take-home pay from the GOP tax cuts. Here's the thing. I've sat here and spoken to Kevin Hassett at the White House, who said that the average American is going to see a $4,000 increase from these tax cuts. I could never get that math to work. I don't think you could either.
That's not math. Of course the math didn't work, because it's not math. Hashtag, where's my $4,000?
Right.
Look, of course wages didn't go up $4,000. Of course the tax plan is unpopular, because people are looking at it. What happened? They cut taxes by $2 trillion for high-income people and large corporations. And lo and behold, we lost $2 trillion. And now to act as though, who could have ever thought by cutting these taxes that the deficit would grow? We have to go cut Social Security. I'm telling you, if they attempt to cut Social Security, they're going to be run out of town in a landslide.
In 2011, when President Obama was attacking spending, this is what Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell had to say about it then. Bruce, listen to this.
He doubles the debt after his term in office and triples it by the end of his budget. He sends our debt on an upward trajectory that is completely unsustainable.
What's reckless, Bob, is the $1.6 trillion deficit we're running this year.
Now, Bruce, the reason I bring this up is because we have all argued, maybe you've never been on the side of the argument that said that sometimes deficits are a good thing, but we've seen deficits sort of following every war that we've been in America and some recessions where the government has introduced stimulus spending. We last saw it after the most recent, the Great Recession. So it's not, some people don't have a universal view about debts and deficits, that sometimes they're useful and sometimes they're not. But it does seem that consistently, as you've said, over the last 40 years, Republicans are consistently against running deficits when they are not in control of the levers, and when they are in control of the levers, they seem to have far fewer problems with it.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, remember back to the end of the Clinton administration when we had budget surpluses.
Yeah.
And we had surpluses because of legislation that raised taxes that every Republican voted against. And then when the surplus emerged, they tried to take credit for it. And George W. Bush inherited those surpluses, and the very first thing he did was have a big tax cut, and then another big tax cut, and then another big tax cut. If we had just kept taxes and spending on automatic pilot from January 2001, by the end of the Bush administration, we would have paid off the national debt. So basically, Republicans, they just make up these lies about the deficit. They love the deficit. That is the truth of the matter, because that is what gives them the political wherewithal to cut spending, which is what they really care about, and only spending that helps people. They want to increase spending for the military. So the truth is they love deficits.
Austin, what happens next? Because Bruce is right. We're getting to a point where conservative orthodoxy says if you're running up deficits, you're going to have to cut. We know that there are great difficulties in cutting what we call entitlement spending, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. We know we're not seeing any cuts to the military, so we'll start to see programs cut that are easy to cut first. But Mitch McConnell has already sounded the drums about cutting into entitlement programs. If Americans don't support this tax plan as it is, are they going to get on board with that?
No, of course they're not going to get on board with it. Look, I tell you what's going to happen. Two things are going to happen. One has already started. The Republican Party has not learned anything from this episode of tax cutting, blowing up the deficit. They've already proposed what they're calling Tax Reform 2.0, which is another multi-trillion-dollar tax cut for high-income people and big corporations. And then the second thing that you're going to see start to happen is they're going to try to cut entitlements, and then when it becomes so obvious that how unpopular that is with the American people, they're going to try to blame that on Democrats. So you've seen them in the midterm elections here about health care and Obamacare. The Republicans trying to claim that they're the ones trying to protect the ban on using pre-existing conditions, and that they're trying to extend health care to all Americans when they have actually been trying to repeal Obamacare and get rid of those.
Guys, thanks for helping me analyze this. Austin Goolsbee and Bruce Bartlett. Coming up next, President Trump is on a swing of wild interviews claiming he's not to blame for any Republican losses and that Michael Cohen was lying under oath about the president. With exactly 3 weeks left until Election Day, President Trump is already trying to avoid accountability for any GOP losses. In an interview with the Associated Press, Trump told reporters that he will not accept blame if Democrats retake the House of Representatives. He made a point of telling the AP that he was not on the ballot this year and claimed that some voters had told him they weren't going to vote in the midterms simply because he's not running. It is true that President Trump will not officially be on the ballot in November, but despite his attempt to distance himself from any political potential bad outcome for his party, Trump has spent the better part of this campaign season explicitly telling GOP voters that this election is all about him.
I want to give a victory speech on the evening of Election Day, which is coming up very quickly. A vote for Morrissey is a vote for me. A vote for Marsha is really a vote for me, and a vote for Cindy is a vote for me, and a vote for Steve is a vote for me. Remember this, a vote for David is a vote for me in our agenda to make America great again. I'm not on the ballot, but in a certain way, I'm on the ballot, so please go out and vote.
So it's all about me until it doesn't work out, and then it's got nothing to do with me. Trump's been spreading that message on the campaign trail. Some vulnerable Republican incumbents have been trying to get out from under Trump's shadow and make this election about anybody else. Take, for instance, Virginia Republican Congressman David Brat, who's locked in a tight re-election battle against Democratic former CIA operative Abigail Spanberger. Brat and Spanberger faced off in a debate last night where the GOP candidate made barely any mention of Donald Trump, focusing instead on another Washington figure.
A vote for my opponent will be a vote for the Nancy Pelosi liberal agenda. Nancy Pelosi, 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 Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi.
That was 10 times. He went on to mention the Democratic Minority Leader another 15 times. Here was his opponent's closing response.
I question again whether Congressman Brat knows which Democrat, in fact, he's running against. I am not Nancy Pelosi, and I am not President Barack Obama. I am a woman who grew up in Henrico County, who grew up in this community, who was taught service, hard work, and a commitment to the belief that the American people can be anything. I want to serve this community. It's the community that made me who I am, and I ask for your vote on November the 6th. Abigail Spanberger is my name.
Well, with Republicans trying to shift the focus away from Trump and toward the Democrats, and Trump trying to shift blame away from himself, what can we expect to see on Election Day 3 weeks from tonight? And perhaps more importantly, whose fault will it be? My panel will help me answer those questions next. We're exactly 3 weeks away from midterm elections, and in an interview tonight with the Associated Press, President Trump said he would not take the blame for any Republican midterm losses. But when Republicans took back the Democratic-controlled Senate in 2014, here's who Donald Trump placed the blame on.
To a large extent, it was because Obama is so unpopular and doing such a poor job. I think it's really a dislike for the president. People don't respect what's happening.
All right, joining us now, Ron Klain, former chief of staff to Vice Presidents Joe Biden and Al Gore, and former Senate senior aide to President Obama. Jennifer Rubin is back with us as well. Jennifer, this is unusual for the president. He takes credit for everything, and now he's suggesting, as he, I guess, reads the tea leaves, that it's possible that Congress shifts power over to the Democrats on November 6th. It's not about him.
Yeah, well, I guess we're not going to have that red wave he's been promising. This seems to be pre-planting the idea that, in fact, they're going to lose at least one house. But I will agree with him in this regard. It's not totally his fault if they lose. The lion's share of the blame really goes to Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell, who decided that they were going to become professional sycophants, that they were going to support him, they were going to indulge him, they were going to enable him. They were not going to do their job in terms of oversight, in terms of their constitutional responsibilities. And voters, turns out, don't like that. They want a check on the president. So if they lose, and they lose big, I think a good deal of the blame has to be put at their feet.
Let's take a look at what it looks like 3 weeks out, Ron. A generic congressional ballot, a survey of women voters say that 59% of them will vote Democrat, 37% will vote Republican. Women voters, minority voters, there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm about them. But take a look at white women voters who do not have a college degree. The Republicans still have a plurality there, 49% to 43% for the Democrats. Tell me how you think this plays out.
Look, I mean, I think there's a long way to go here with 3 weeks left to go, and anything can happen. But you do see all the signs of a big Democratic victory, particularly in the House. And Trump may not be on the ballot. Jennifer's right about the Republican leadership. But people are going to go vote. Democrats and independents are going to vote because Donald Trump is in the White House. And what they're really worried about is if he gets a Republican Congress for 2 more years, that Congress will work with Trump to finish dismantling protection for pre-existing conditions, take apart people's health care, explode the deficit even more than they already have, and come after Social Security and Medicare, as you're talking about earlier tonight, Allie. So the combination of 2 more years of Republican Congress, 2 more years of Donald Trump is a scary combination to many voters, justifiably so. And I think you're going to see a big turnout from voters who care about that this fall.
Jennifer, you and I have had a lot of occasion in the last several weeks to talk about women and how they might react to Donald Trump. Here's what he said about women voters tonight on Fox.
I had worse poll numbers when I went into the last election, and you saw how well I did with women. I mean, if you looked at my poll numbers going into 2016, you would have said, there's not a woman in the country that's going to vote for me. And I did phenomenal with women. I did. In fact, that was one of the reasons, probably the reason I won in a true sense.
So, Jennifer, this is a little bit of Donald Trump's sleight of hand, right? He just keeps on saying it, so it must be true. He didn't do phenomenal with women, and he's still not doing phenomenally with women.
Yeah, he lost women. He keeps saying he won women, but that's white women, because apparently he doesn't consider non-white women to be voters or people. So that's pretty indicative of how he thinks about things. I do think that as much as we have talked about women voters, I think there is a lack of appreciation, frankly, for just how angry and how energized women voters are. We see it among groups that, frankly, the president did pretty well with during the election. Married women, white women, college-educated white women in particular are off the charts now in opposition to him. And I think that enthusiasm and that anger is going to drive them to the polls. And on a day like this, where he's back insulting women's appearances, as he was, where he's back spouting a bunch of nonsense, it just reminds every woman how much they detest this guy. And I think if there are big victories, the Democratic Party is going to have to owe a big debt of gratitude to American women.
Yeah, look, if there's something, Ron, that is good that's come of the last couple of years, it is the degree to which so many more women are involved very directly in the political process as candidates. This is going to be an historic election, regardless of the outcome. In fact, there's a political ad from the Serve America PAC for female candidates running for office this year. Let's just listen to that.
Before I announced my candidacy for Congress, I chose to serve my country. I bled on foreign soil for people to have the right to vote.
This is the first time I've run for office. I have never run for political office before.
I started realizing maybe I should run myself. Like, all right, let's go. Let's do this.
And come November 6th, I will continue to serve the people of Michigan,
of Pennsylvania,
New Jersey, Kentucky,
Virginia, the people of Texas.
I will continue to serve the people of the United States of America. Are you ready to serve America?
I mean, Ron, a movement that took steam right after the president's election with marches across the country has actually manifested into women who have not been involved in politics in many cases, running for office, in many cases poised to win election to Congress and other statewide offices across the country.
That's right, Allie. I mean, the Democrats have nominated 180 women for Congress. That's a record, 50% more than the previous record. The Democratic Party in 2018 is the first major political party in American history to have a majority of its congressional candidates not be white men. A third of the candidates are people of color. And many of these candidates are just exceptional people. We've got a woman candidate who won the Distinguished Cross of Valor for flying in combat situations. Women in the Aviation Hall of Fame. Just an astonishingly talented, amazing group of candidates who are not just white men. Also, younger candidates and candidates not taking PAC money. That's a big change for us in this election.
It's going to be an historic night, one way or the other. Thanks to both of you, as always, Jennifer Rubin and Ron Klain. And tonight's last word is next. Time for tonight's last word.
This is a guy you love.
I know all these things. I mean, I'm not a baby.
Yes. Okay? He's not a baby because a baby wets his own bed. Now, Trump... allegedly.
And that's tonight's last word.
Hey,
it's Chris Hayes from MSNBC. You know, every day I come to the office and we make a television show, and every day I think to myself, there's so much more I want to talk about. And so this is our podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening? And the whole idea behind it is to get to the root of the things that we see play out every day. They're driven by big ideas. Each week, I sit down with a person uniquely suited to explain why this is happening.
New episodes of Why Is This Happening? Every Tuesday. Listen for free wherever you get your podcasts.